to Jazz Appreciation. This week we're going to be talking about cool jazz and hardbop that developed in the 1950s. As always, if you wish to go through this slide presentation on your own or a little bit more in depth, you can find this presentation on our Google Classroom. I'm not going to read through every single slide because, quite frankly, that would be really boring. But I'm going to touch on the highlights of cool jazz and hardbop in the 1950s. So we come to our first real famous cool jazz musician. That is Dave Brubeck. Okay, he pioneered very strange time signatures and became emblematic of jazz as a hip, sophisticated, modern music for the age of affluence. There was a lot of, especially in the 1950s and into the early 1960s, we get a lot of strange sounds coming out of these jazz musicians that a lot of younger people really, really liked, as we will see in the avant-garde period next week. All right, so we get some new schools. So bebop was a style that many who had grown up with swing could not simply accept. When bebop did not fade away, many of these same people lost interest in jazz, and at the same time, some of the younger swing musicians adapted to the new music. So remember, we looked at bebop last week, and this kind of rise of the more popular, unique style of jazz out of the swing era. Okay, and now we're really moving into this, an evolution of bebop into this new cool school, cool jazz, and hardbop styles. These very strange styles of music that are exciting to listen to and at times kind of hard to dance to. So remember, the word jazz achieved its present day meaning after bebop. Okay, what we consider jazz today is the sounds of cool jazz that you might hear in a poem reading or bookstore, or even actually if you go to Starbucks, you may even hear some cool jazz and hardbop jazz music in being played in the Starbucks. Remember, the term jazz is a unifying umbrella term that encompasses all different forms of jazz, including those earlier than bebop, and especially those from bebop and onwards. When we get into cool jazz today and hardbop today, as well as avant-garde and acid jazz and more on the hip-hop side of things as well. So what is cool jazz? Well, by the early 1950s, the word cool was used to describe a kind of toned-down jazz from its bebop brothers and sisters. Later, the term cool jazz became associated with a number of white musicians who relocated to California, where they could get day gigs at movie studios. And unfortunately, African-American jazz musicians could not. Get that score. Sorry, I just spit down the wrong tube. Okay, and they created this new style of jazz called West Coast jazz, which we can consider as cool jazz. Now, for white or Caucasian players to represent a kind of cool jazz is a little bit ironic, since the idea of coolness has its roots in African-American culture. Now, how does cool jazz contrast or differ from hot jazz or bebop jazz? Well, cool jazz is characterized by limited vibrato, so we have no vibration of the notes. We have these very straight notes, restrained tonal qualities, very stable dynamics, so we're not seeing volume changes, dynamic changes going up and down. Okay, and it's very calm. The melody is very, very calm. Whereas hot jazz, it's very aggressive, lots of improvisation, lots of overtones, and lots of dynamic changes. It's very moody type of jazz. Hot jazz, it just seems like it is more aggressive than cool jazz, which is, when you listen to it, it is definitely more laid back. So here are just some artists. I'm not going to go into any of the main details here, but if you wish to read through them, please feel free. We've got Lennie Tristano, who is a blind piano player. We've got Tad Dameron, okay, who is also a piano player, but he is also a very good guitar player as well, okay. You have to always remember that these jazz artists, most of the time, are trained classically, okay. They're classically trained artists who then shift over from the classical world into the jazz world. More exciting type of style of music. All right, so here we have Lennie Tristano. He initiated a cult following to play his complex music, but he could also sit in with this unusual style of playing with swing and bebop, and play with different jazz musicians in this kind of new cool stool style. Okay, in this photo here particularly, we have some very famous jazz musicians. Okay, we've got trumpet player here. Okay, this is Max Kaminsky, and by the way, this is at New York's Birdland Music Club. Okay, people would go to these types of clubs to drink, to enjoy, to converse, to relax, and to listen to music. And so here on the far left, we have Max Kaminsky on the trumpet. We have a very, very famous tenor saxophone player, Lester Young, which we will talk about. We have Orrin Hot Lips Page. He's also on the trumpet. Now, they call him Hot Lips Page because he is very well known in playing the hot school or the hot style of jazz rather than the cool school style. And we also have another exceptionally famous alto saxophone player, Charlie Parker, who we have mentioned a couple times in the last presentations. So, birth of cool. So in 1945, we get Miles Davis. He played on Charlie Parker's first recording. And you can actually hear the major differences in the way he plays in 1945 than the way he played earlier. Now we get one song called Venus de Milo, played by Miles Davis, okay, with the half chorus by Gerry Mulligan. Okay, we get lots of really cool things happening in this song. We get some solos, we get some locked in tempo, so the tempo doesn't really change. We get really smooth and lower tones for dynamics. The texture is very, very subdued. It's very nice, very mild. There's not a lot of high notes that are really loud. Everything is very, very cool, very, very, very laid back. Okay, so you can find this song, Venus de Milo, on our Google Classroom, or if you'd like to search for different variations of this song, feel free to look it up. But it's a really good song to listen to in terms of giving you a sense of what cool school or the cool style of jazz is all about. Okay, we also get, like I said, Gerry Mulligan, part of the band the West Coast Jazz Style. Okay, he's from New York. Okay, very, very good composer. So he wrote a lot of head tunes and music for the major musicians such as Miles Davis and the Stan Kenton Band. Okay, in Los Angeles. He also met up with Gil Evans. Okay, who was he was a musician, but he was also a what do you call it? Like a manager, producer, bringing musicians together to play. He was really all about the business side of the music. And here we have Gerry Mulligan. Okay, the only baritone or the only bari sax player to become a major jazz star. There's not a lot of bari sax players out there. The bari sax is the largest saxophone that you typically find in a jazz combo group or a jazz big band or any kind of jazz band. Right now, out in the world, there's a few really great jazz baritone saxophone players. If you take a look at, if you Google Leo, Leop, just the letter P, into YouTube, you will see a guy. His name is Leo P. That's his nickname. Phenomenal bari sax player, and he is really good at getting the audience going and creating some of the coolest sounds out of the bari sax that I've ever heard. So I'll throw that on our Google Classroom as well. So take a look there for a really good example of bari saxophone playing from Leo P, as well as from Gerry Mulligan as well, especially when we take a look at a couple of tunes. So we also get John Lewis and the Modern Jazz Quartet. Now, a Modern Jazz Quartet features 4 musicians. Okay, we usually have an accompanist, either a bass player or piano player, a saxophonist or a couple of saxophonists. Sometimes you get a guitar player. We also get a trumpet, and sometimes you get a trombone in these groups of 4. Okay, so John Lewis, in contrast to the Mulligan Quartet, the MJQ, the Modern Jazz Quartet, was an African-American East Coast development. Okay, started by John Lewis, with each member of the band having extra musical duties. Okay, so Lewis, who was in charge of the music, also had a lifelong interest in polyphony, so many different sounds coming at the same time, so people playing at the same time. And he really liked the old style classical music written by Bach. Now, Lewis worked with Dizzy Gillespie, okay, and he recorded with Charlie Parker, one of the most famous saxophone players out there, okay, and Dizzy Gillespie, one of the most famous trumpet players out there. But there was the Gerry Mulligan Quartet, okay, which had one style, especially on the West Coast, okay, Los Angeles. And then we get John Lewis's group, his Modern Jazz Quartet, completely on the other side in New York, on the East Coast Jazz. Okay. Very similar in terms of the laid-back feeling, right? That cool jazz style, but different in terms of the sound created based on the West Coast Jazz and the East Coast Jazz. Okay. And here we have John Lewis. Okay, very, very great piano player out of New York, Manhattan specifically. Okay. And in the background, we've got Milt Jackson, who is really, really great at playing the marimba and the vibraphone, xylophone type instruments. Really great at it. Now we get into some of the more major jazz musicians of this period. We have Lester Young. Okay. The lightness of Young's playing influenced cool jazz and a generation of brand new tenor saxophone players who went in 2 different directions. We get the black tenors, so the African-American tenor players, Dexter Gordon, Wardell Gray, Illinois Jacket, Gene Ammons. Okay, they changed Young's legato phrasing, so these very smooth, okay, by adding some strong attacks. Do ba do da boo do ba do do da ri da boo da boo ba do boo ba ba do up bop. And then we also get Stan Getz, Zoot Sims, Al Cohn, and Alan Eager, okay, who are the white or the Caucasian tenor saxophone players who focus on his lyricism, so the melodic lines of his playing. We also get Dave Brubeck, who we saw in the beginning of the presentation. Okay, he very recently died, but he grew up in the West Coast in California. His family was exceptionally musical. Okay, and Brubeck was influenced by a lot of early jazz sounds, especially the blues coming out of the 1940s. Okay. Now, Brubeck's style of music was that style of hot jazz, not cool jazz. But he met up with a guy named Paul Desmond, who was on the cool jazz side, and they both came together and formed a quartet of musicians who were then able to create this new style of music, which is more associated with the cool school style. Okay, and Brubeck was really great at improvising. Really, really good at improvising and soloing around scales. And his primary trademark was the use of odd-numbered meters. right? 3/4 time. 6/8 time is an even number, but he had these weird ones, yeah, like 3/4 time. Right, or 5/8 time, or 5/4 time. So he used these really odd meters when he was playing, which gives you this really cool, groovy type of feel. Hard to dance to, but it gives you this cool groove. So we get this group. They're called the Four Brothers. Okay, they all play different types of saxophones. We have 3 tenor saxophone players. So we've got tenor saxophone player here, Herbie Stewart. Okay, and then we have tenor saxophone here, Al Kahn. Okay, and then we have Herbie Stewart, Al Kahn, Zoot Sims, and Serge Kraloff, okay, who's playing the bari sax. And they formed this small quartet, okay, the saxophone quartet. And in 1957, they had a reunion recording session where they all played together, and that's what we see here. But prior to this, in 1947, they came together as a band, and 10 years later they reunited and recorded once again. And now we move away from cool jazz or cool school jazz into hardbop, which is of the same period, in the mid to late 1950s. It is a style of jazz that is in opposition or opposes cool schools, okay? And it was developed on the East Coast, where you have this harder edge style music, this kind of more aggressive style of cool school jazz music. And Miles Davis instigated this evolutionary turn from cool to hardbop, okay, when he reacted to what he viewed as an over-intellectualized jazz scene. Okay, people were thinking too much. He believed that people were putting too much technicality in what they were playing. They were thinking too much about form. They were thinking too much about theory and how the music is coming together, and they weren't truly being expressive. And so Miles Davis really wanted to experiment with the idea of being more expressive in music. And now we are moving, as you will see next week, into this very strange style of jazz called avant-garde jazz. But hardbop is that precursor to avant-garde, this more expressionist type feel, this more harder edge to the sound. Okay, and it was mostly played by urban musicians. Okay, musicians from the cities, sometimes even from the rough parts of major cities, in the East Coast. Like we get Detroit from the kind of the mid East Coast, as well as Philadelphia, and especially from New York. Okay, and in contrast to cool jazz, the tonal quality, the timbre of the sound was very heavy, was very dark, okay, and it was very impassioned, lots of passion going on. Okay, there was lots of focus on the lower tenor sax and the drums, who played more of an assertive style of music, right? More aggressive, more assertive, very dark, very heavy, but still with that kind of laid-back feel, but it's kind of this uneasy laid-back feel. But they both cool and hardbop, cool jazz and hardbop, represented natural developments from bop, right? That kind of laid-back style, more freely expressive style of music, okay? From that the very more structured style of swing. Hardbop musicians were inclined to play long solos, very, very long. Sometimes they would last 20 minutes or longer. Okay, especially because of the use of and the development of new technologies. Okay, when we bring in this idea of electricity, especially in terms of the electric guitar and the new developments in saxophones and the new developments in saxophone mouthpieces and reed quality, you can get these different types of sound that allows the player to play longer without really weakening their chops, their lips, and the way they play. So we get one of the most famous hard bop artists, as you saw in the title slide to this presentation, Art Blakey. Okay, he passed away in the year that I was born. Okay, he's originally from Pittsburgh. Okay, that East Coast style of jazz. And then moved to New York, and he worked with a very famous singer, Mary Lou Williams, as we've talked about before, in the mid-1940s. Excuse me. Okay, he became one of the central drummers of bebop, and then one of the most famous drummers of the hard bop style. But remember, he had those bebop roots, and from prior to that, those swing and classical roots as well. And so everything evolves, everything develops, even from the avant-garde period of the 60s and early 70s into today. We also get a guy named Thelonious Monk, and Art Blakey played with Thelonious Monk, and Thelonious Monk is a piano player, okay, who we will talk about as well. And he also played with Horace Silver in the early 1950s, who's a very good piano player as well, and very famous piano player too. So here we have Art Blakey. I would highly recommend that you, or Art Blakey, excuse me. I highly recommend that you take a look, YouTube, search up his name, search up his style of playing. He's got slower laid back styles and then some exceptionally crazy, fast, complicated, complex rhythmic styles as well. As mentioned, we got the piano player Horace Silver, who was discovered by Stan Getz. Remember, we talked about Stan Getz from the cool jazz period. Okay, he's one of those Caucasian musicians that took after Lester Young. Okay, and Horace Silver worked with Hawkins and Lester Young and Charlie Parker. Okay, and he also helped Miles Davis turn from cool jazz to hard bop, which may have taken some convincing. I don't know if Davis really had the inkling to do so, but I think after he experienced a little bit of the hard bop style and played around with some of it, he was able to move into that style. And here we have Horace Silver. Okay, this is in the 1950s. He established funk as the quintessential soulful rhythmic popularization of the jazz style. Okay, this idea of funk. But remember, he's trained also as a bebop swing musician. Excuse me. And so we get the three major soloists that come out of this period, out of cool jazz and hard bop. Okay, we get many different type of people, different soloists, different famous soloists that come out of this period. But there are three that are really, really important, and let's get to them now. We got Clifford Brown and Sonny Rollins. They are truly, really important soloists at this time. Okay, they could stand alone on their own. They didn't even need a band in order to get up on stage and play. Okay, Clifford Brown, very short career, okay, but very famous. He died in a car accident only at the age of 25. And he would most likely, possibly, I suppose, still be alive today. Maybe not playing, but still be alive. Okay, and very great trumpet player. Okay, and then we get into Sonny Rollins, the second of our three famous soloists of this time period. Sonny Rollins played tenor saxophone. He also dabbled in alto too, but mostly in the tenor saxophone. Okay, unlike Brown, he had a very long and successful career, changing his style a number of times along the way. Okay, he's very unpredictable, very playful in how he plays, and it's really, really exciting to listen to some of his recordings. Okay, here we have Sonny Rollins playing the tenor saxophone. Very famous picture of him playing in 1956. Okay, it is raining at this time. And then our last of our three soloists is Wes Montgomery. Okay, very famous guitar player, acoustic guitar player, and electric guitar player. But remember, with the advent of electricity in musical instruments, the advancement or evolution of the technology, we get this true style of cool and hard bop jazz, right? This very laid back style where guitar players could solo for a very long time and still hold the attention and the ears of the audience. And here we have Wes Montgomery. All right. So here's just some songs for you to take a listen to. I will post some of them onto our Google Classroom of the ones that I think are the most influential and most famous. So we've got Miles Davis, Boplicity. We've got Gerry Mulligan on the baritone saxophone. Okay, the MJQ, the Modern Jazz Quartet. Dave Brubeck on the piano. Please take a listen to Take 5. Take 5 is one of the coolest songs ever. It's in a 5/4 time signature. Okay. It's awesome. Art Blakey. Okay, and Horace Silver. So I'll post these on our Google Classroom. Have a listen. Okay, and here's just a little bit more. Sonny Rollins especially. Okay, St. Thomas is one of his most famous songs. Jazz musicians today, even in high schools, still play this tune. Lennie Tristano. Okay, as well as Tad Dameron. All right, that's all that we have today, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at any point in time. As well, don't forget to answer the discussion question for this week on this video. All right, have a wonderful week ahead. Bye for now.